Now we'll just transition our way over, huh, Mark? How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's a great talk. I always love hearing from them. So I'm super excited to have our next person come up. Some quick backstory. I was at Data Day Texas presenting on data quality and had a kind of a group discussion. Sarah was one of those people, and she was describing how she transformed this company and started going further and further left of actually fixing the people and processes of data quality. And immediately afterwards, I was like, I have to have you at this conference. So I'm super happy for her to be here and kind of share what her work is.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for that intro. I did prepare some slides for you guys. I'm just going to try and
Share
figure
'em.
out how to share those. Just a moment. Okay, share. There we go. Good. Okay. So, all right. So shifting left with Sequentum, right? So a little bit about me. So as Mark said, I really have a lot to say on this topic, and I love that you guys have organized this first Shift Left conference. Shifting left is a term that we talked a lot about back in the 90s when we were switching from the waterfall methodology of testing and certifying software over to Agile XP and then Agile methodologies. And as you can see from my little stack of books that I'm sharing here, all my old besties, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff over the years. I'm going to share some of my stories with you today, but I'm also going to walk you through at a high level how I think about applying all this experience to the world of data. And then if we have time, we can dive into a little bit about, how exactly we did it at Sequentum. Um, I'm not sure if we're going to get to all of that. So a little bit about me. So I'm running this company, Sequentum. I basically came along and found they had what was for me the most enviable tech, right? I had been working in very, very large scale automated operations for decades, with browsers and all of that. But what they had was a low code interface, right, which is incredible for driving efficiency. And they also had a custom browser, which helped in the scraping world to get around all the blocking. So those two things were really critical. And I joined this company in 2017. They had been at it since 2008. So really, really mature tech. And a little bit more about us. So we go to market in basically four different ways. We take that, the core of, web scraping or web data pipelines, as we sometimes call them. And we make it available through on-prem software. So like healthcare companies that are working with regulated data or government agencies that are working with classified data sets, right? They will set up all those pipelines, probably not web data, but just regular data. They'll use our on-prem software for that. We also have a cloud version of our software, nothing to install, not even an extension. Pay as you go, jump on, everything's there, servers, proxies, everything's integrated, your custom browser, low code interface, et cetera. And then we have data as a service. And this is really for us, our headlights into what are all the difficult blocking scenarios? What are all the interesting new multimodal data types that we need to support? It's sort of our headlights into where we need to go with the product. And the last thing is our intelligent agents. So ChatGPT is probably one of the best things that happened to Sequentum in the last decade, right? Opened up whole new avenues for us. We're not just doing data now, we're doing AI. So we have been running, profitable, autonomous intelligent agents for clients since basically Q2 of 2023. So a lot of excitement there. And then we also, because, we're incredible nerds, in the area of compliance and because risk mitigation, it's not just quality, it's also compliance. We loaned our Sequentum operating guidelines and worked with the finance industry with SIAA, FISD, All Data Council to publish the Web Data Collection Considerations, which aligned, basically the finance industry, the alt data community, and doing data-driven investment decision-making. And now we're working with the Alliance for Responsible Data Collection, bringing that to data industry at large. We're defining an extension of the Croissant dataset documentation standard. We're working with OpenAI, Common Crawl, and others to basically put out there a methodology and audit capability so that data sets can be certified as kosher, right? So the AI that's consuming them can be certified as kosher. We're hoping that that is a effective strategy for dealing with all the lawsuits and a lot of the bad actors that are in our space. So what are we doing? So web data, it's notoriously difficult. This is the hardest area to automate with reliability and compliance and trust, right? How do you actually do that? Well, you have to take all of the best practices from 20 years of testing, doing security functionals, performance testing on software, every single kind of technology, and applying it to, how do you actually ingest the data? And then how do you make sure that what you're ingesting in real time is meeting your expectations and your rules? So it's shifting left in the sense that the entire system is built from the ground up to make sure that nothing bad ever enters the fray. Right, and essentially it's change management at scale. Right, I'm gonna try and stay high level, and then in the end, I'm happy to go into details. But right, the three levers that you have: people, process, and tools. Right, and the four areas that you basically want to think about is first and foremost your methodology. Have to make sure everyone's aligned on that, knows what it is. Then you want to, of course, make the problem manageable in every way possible, make the entire operation transparent, and empower people to jump in and do something at the moment it's needed. Right, methodology-wise, right, I don't know how many people here are in startups, but I suspect you are, because our industry is pretty new. But right, you want to clarify the problem. And, for example, I worked at one company. We were putting ads in video games. And so we had 120 AAA video games in our lab at any time. And if any of you are gamers, you know that every single one of those games is completely different. The media formats are different. The way they're built is different. The gaming engine is different. You don't have cheats, right? It's incredibly challenging. But the same approach applies, right? When you're collecting requirements, you templatize it as much as possible. You make sure that you're defining that acceptance criteria up front. And in our case, we communicated it to the publishers and developers at the contract level, right? You want to make sure there's a review and approval process so that, if there are things that are not going to be fixed by the time that game has to go out the door, that there is an approval process. And people are signing off on that, right? Because it can affect commercials. But also there may be stakeholders along the way that say, you know what, that is just not okay, right? And then you treat every problem as an opportunity, right? Every time you have a release, every time you have a big issue, you do a postmortem, right? There's no shame in having problems, right? This is what we're doing. We are building value, and we are going to come across problems, and every single one of them is an opportunity. And so you're always going to want to have a CI/CD roadmap, right? Continuous improvement, continuous deployment. You want to have that roadmap for how it's going to be better next time, right? So you identify all those issues, right? Don't be shy. Some of the conversations are difficult, right? You have to trust your team. You have to make sure that they can speak up. You have a list of all those issues, and you basically stack rank them. You define the severity, you define the likelihood that it's going to happen again, And then you define what that mitigation is, right? Is it people? Do you need people with other skills? Do you need better training, right? Do you need a process to make sure that that doesn't happen again? Or do you need tooling? Is there something that you can build to actually bulletproof it, right? And then you just stack rank it based on the severity and the likelihood that it's going to happen again and the difficulty of building that mitigation. Always have your CI/CD roadmap. Don't pretend that you're ever going to get to a place without that roadmap. You're always going to have your list of, oh, if I just had this, it would get so much better. And in fact, in the case of that ads and video game startups, when Microsoft came to acquire us for hundreds of millions of dollars, that document was core to that discussion, right? Because they looked at it and they saw hundreds and hundreds of lines of bulletproofing, bulletproofing, bulletproofing. And that's normally how they negotiate down the price of a startup. So, when they raised that hood, they didn't take $1 off that valuation. So it really adds up. Okay, so manageability, right? You want to make sure it's manageable, right? In our world of web data, right, it's like, oh my God, like if you just write one Python script and try and pull the data down, that's great. It's going to run once, but try running it every hour of every day, 24/7, 365 days a year, and have some quant, algorithm trading on that data, downstream, right? That little script that you wrote is not going to work, especially when you have thousands of these things running, right? Make it manageable. So you want reusable atomic building blocks, right? So in our world, we have like a URL command, right? And there's all of the settings and things that you might want to configure on that URL command. It has the basic URL, but it also has things like, how are you dealing with, are you rotating the proxy when you're loading it? How are you, how long do you wait? How many times do you retry? There's 60 settings on that URL command that you can configure. And for us, that makes it bulletproof because all the things that typically go on with URLs are baked in to the command. They're always at play. And then you want to prioritize, of course, composability. You want to have low code point and click as much as possible because it's just going to be faster and more intuitive for teams to, build and deploy quickly. But then you don't want to create barriers, right? So when something comes out, some new technology comes out that your point and click hasn't built support for yet, you can always go to the scripting engine, right? At Sequentum, we support, JavaScript, C#, Python, regular expression, these are normal programming languages, no proprietary languages, right? Nothing new to learn, normal languages that people know, that they're comfortable with, let them upload files and third-party libraries, reach out to these brilliant AI services that we have now to augment, the intelligence of the workflow. Just allow it, right? And for the things that you use over and over, create templates, right? We have templates. We have a big philosophy to create templates with everything that we do. And you bulletproof the template, right? You don't want to maintain thousands of agents. You want to maintain smart templates. And I'm sure that this has been touched on here. I'm not going to go into it, but infrastructure as code, use automation everywhere you can, apply the same principles to how the sausage is made and how the software and the platform gets out there and how the jobs get scheduled. So transparency, another really, really, really big factor, right? You want to break down the silos between teams in order to drive trust, right? If the data engineer who gets a very specific technical problem, right, hopefully is alerted in real time to exactly what the problem is and where the problem is, right, without having to hunt for it. When that portfolio manager whose signal is now, it's instead of saying, yay, these sneakers are amazing, Nike, invest in Nike, he's all of a sudden getting a negative signal, right? And he's like, it's not true. The stock is going up. Why, what happened on this date, right? And when he drills down into the system, he can actually drill down in because it's all low code, reusable building blocks. It's very easy to document. These agents are automatically documented. He can go and see exactly what happened when. He can go back and look in the versions. He can see who changed what. He can see the ticket that has the detail of the change, right? This is all important, right? He can see, oh, we were trying to save money and we changed the AI service we were using to assess sentiment. We went from the expensive one that understands when someone's like, whoa, these sneakers are mad cool, right? And that's positive. That's not negative because mad is negative, right? Like we changed to the cheap sentiment service and it thinks that that's negative now. Oh no, that's terrible, right? So then is that the data engineer's fault? No, right? The data engineer is doing the right thing. That transparency really drives trust and it really helps with all of those relationships that can get really tough when things don't go well. Right? You need all the bells and whistles, SOC 2, Type 2, audit accredited, all those badges, you know, the formality and discipline like that, those things are always worth the investment. And they make everybody more sane. But you want to empower your team, right? So when something goes wrong, you really want it to be assigned to the person, not the senior person who then has to call the middle person who then has to call the junior person, right? You don't want any of that. You want it to go straight to the person who can fix the problem. We are in the business of real-time data, right? It's driving business decision making, right? There's no downtime, right? You can't have downtime, but it's web data. Things go wrong. So the second something happens, right, everything is secure, everything's encrypted in all the right ways. You have your SOC 2, you know, you're meeting all your SOC 2 standards, but the person who's responsible, who can actually effect a change, is immediately empowered to do so, right? Download the latest version, point, click, fix, deploy, kick off that run, right? Don't allow gaps in that data, right? Because time series, you don't want gaps, right? Make sure all the proper audit trails are captured. Make sure you have role-based authentication so that if that person is not there, someone on their team is also equally empowered. But every change has an owner, right? Every change gets checked in. Everything's tracked. Everything's audited, right? Anyone can see the audit trail at any time, right? You're separating dev, QA, and prod, right? That's a whole nother big area that's worth investing in. Make sure that you have all that segmentation done properly. And in our case, there's a lot of detailed requirements with the automation platform that have to do with driving that shift left sort of methodology and, you know, transparency and, you know, all these good best practices. And then there's also a lot of specific data quality sort of measures that we have that sort of come standard out of the box. You know, and of course we can customize them to every data set. But you know, I don't know if we have time to go into all of these details, but happy to take it offline with any of you if you want to know more about those. Does anyone have questions?
Always so many questions. Excellent. So I'm not sure if Mark's going to jump up on the screen too, but I'm searching through the questionnaire. So give me a sec, and I imagine people are gonna pop in some questions into the chat right now too as we realize that it is ending. Sometimes you know that you know the talk is ending, and then other times it just ends abruptly, and you kind of caught me off guard. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't realize we were ending right away.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
It's not your
Um,
fault. It's my fault.
I'm here.
yeah, I
I'm
mean,
here.
yeah,
Um,
I can also share like some more stories as well. Like I'm sure that you guys have, you know, these terrible stories, but I like to think of shifting left as really a way to sort of augment the joy in the team, right?
mm,
You're basically, you know, all the pain, we all know the pain that can happen on these teams, right? When things go wrong. And when things go really, really wrong, like, you know, people don't always behave their best, right? It's very stressful, it's very painful, right? And so the more of this kind of rigor and discipline risk mitigation, that you can put in, shifting left, you know,
Mm.
if you have a system like putting in a contract, that's great. Like that's just going to help spread joy, right? Because ultimately, the devil's in the details, and those downstream data consumers, they don't necessarily have any idea what happened, um, you know, when the data
Yeah,
came originally from that source. But if all those best practices are in play, then every little thing that goes wrong, the impact seems to be, tends to be smaller, easier to fix, easier to describe what went wrong, right? And faster to fix, right? So the more rigor and the more discipline, the stronger the team, the better the outcome, the more joy, right? And at Sequentum, we actually, a lot of us have worked together for decades. We just choose to keep working together and find ways to work together, and to pull in all our besties, because we all really believe that, doing things the right way, um, is
brilliant.
just a joyous way to be, and creates enormous value.
So I actually have a question for you, Sarah.
Hmm.
You started off saying that shift left isn't really new. It's been around for 20 years. And that actually aligns with Chad's recent article on it, where he's like giving all
Hmm.
these different examples across the
Yeah.
industry for that. And, shift left data is just another iteration of that, of this
Hmm.
pattern. I guess given that you have this historical context, I guess what were the early mistakes of early shift left, and what can we learn moving forward applying it to data?
Well, I think, agile, fragile, right? Like people were like, oh, let's just move really quick and break things, but they didn't actually have rigor, and they didn't have automated testing, and they didn't have acceptance criteria well defined. And they were just, sort of throwing stuff out there, and it wasn't disciplined or formal, and it wasn't actually agile at all, because then they ended up fighting more fires again. So that was probably the biggest one. But even back with XP, extreme programming, we wasted an enormous amount of resources, with people sitting next to each other and trying to pair program and trying to sort of nip those bugs, at the bud. You don't need to have two people sitting next to each other. Like that was an idea that really caught on for a while, and it really slowed down everybody, right? It was no good. Because there's 20 ways to fix a problem, and it doesn't matter if you do it, you know, method 1 or method 20. The point is if it's passing acceptance criteria or not. And then, so
Mhm.
there were a lot of things like that in the beginning, in the 90s, when we had this waterfall methodology, and they would throw this software over the, yeah, I do not miss extreme programming, that's for sure. um, I recognize the name Pete Cooney. I wonder if, yeah, anyway, I'll have to touch base with you after this. But yeah, no, in the days of waterfall, it was terrible. I mean, they used to literally throw the software over the fence, and
Mm.
we would try to find all of the issues, and inevitably we wouldn't. Of course we wouldn't. And then we would get blamed for not finding them. Why didn't you find them? You tested the software for a full week, right? And then, it was just so painful. There was no joy at all. And of course, if they had any delays, it would come out of the testing schedule, because you had to deliver the software on a very specific date. One terrible story that happened one time is uh, it was a Walker Digital Disney startup, and this was early in my career. This was only my second job at a .com, and there were a lot of lessons that I hadn't learned. And one of them was, if you really know that there's a best practice that no one is following, um, don't just put your hand down because you don't, because no one's listening to you. Literally jump up and down and bang on the table and stand on the table and scream from the rafters, right? So this
Oh,
company, they weren't doing performance testing, and the business goal was 50,000 concurrent gameplays a minute. And then it was games of skill. Somebody was going to win $1 million every month. So it was such a fun,
Oh.
fun startup to be at. But nobody was doing performance testing, and I was very concerned about this. I'd built a whole model, and I'd gone around the whole company and gotten everyone's input and everyone's review, and everyone had signed off on it. I had all this detailed breakdown of the resource model and the capacity model, and and I'd built all of these performance testing scripts and automated all these games, winning some, losing some, doing everything very, very carefully. But and I kept saying, when are we have to do this testing months before release, because we're going to find bugs, and these are hard bugs to fix. Like, you can't just come together at the last second. And they were like, oh, young, inexperienced person, very nice, yeah, haha. And nobody listened to me, and I just was like, all right, well, I guess we're going to be late releasing, right, was my assumption. Not going to hit our dates. And so it came into test, and they, I ran my scripts, and it failed, stack traces everywhere at 25 concurrent users. And I was like, oh, okay, I'd seen this a million times. And I was like, well, there's a bug when you roll, this is, basically what's happening. And they were like, oh, the testing doesn't work. And I was like, well, that's a possibility. It's only 25 users. Let's just do it as humans. And right, there are 99 people in the company. We went slowly up on a Friday afternoon, got up to 20, the exact same errors, stack traces. It didn't, whatever, it's the first time we did integration testing, right? There were errors, it didn't scale. They shut the company down because they were out of money. So Monday we came in and we were all laid off. I was like,
Wow, so
next
they had
time
you
I'm
work
going to
late
speak
Friday.
up. Next time I'm going to
Had you
speak
work
up.
late on a
Right?
Friday and then laid off Monday. But look
Speak
at you
up.
now. You're a CEO
Yeah.
now, so it all worked out.
Yeah, I know. It's really all about making sure people are empowered, making sure that you're listening to that voice that's saying you're doing it all wrong, right? Putting rigor and discipline into how you approach it, shifting left to try to nip it in the bud. Every time there's some issue you don't have a solution to, people, process, tools, get your mitigations in place early, shift left, right? Yeah, and that acceptance criteria, which is, I'm calling it acceptance criteria, that's an agile term, but you guys are, you've coined a whole new thing in the data industry of these data contracts, like, yes, right? That's a great term, right? You make sure you have those rules defined and agreed to, and everyone's aligned, right? So when it doesn't match, you can do something about it immediately, right?
And one last question, in that, you talked about, you being early in your career and no one really listening. With you being
Yeah.
a CEO role now, and then there's a
Yeah.
lot of other leaders in the audience, how do you create a culture where, people who do see something but may not have the seniority can really bring that up and people listen?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't always get listened to as the CEO, right? I mean, sometimes you need to create an environment where people are willing to speak up and willing to, just not take what you say as dogma, right? But then you also you need to be able to defend the things that really matter, and you need to pick your battles, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter where you sit in the organization, right? What matters is you need to find a way to break through the problems that really, really matter.
Excellent.
Amazing.
Well, there was one question that came through in the chat that I wanted to ask you before we jump. And to piggyback on it, one person was asking, hey, can we see that second to last slide of yours again so we can take a screenshot because it went by too fast?
Yeah, sure. Of course. Let me do that.
All around the data quality requirements.
Yeah. So,
And
but I would say there's two things, right?
Mhm.
So this is the automation requirements, right? Like, you need to have all of these. You need to make sure that you can, you have that easy to maintain system, that you can vary the input data, vary the output data. You want to make sure you can vary your delivery endpoints, because those are always changing too. That should not throw anyone for a loop. You want that real-time quality monitoring, right? You want some process automation to detect and handle errors when they come up. You want that transparency, all that good stuff. So couple this with all those checks at the data level. So for us, this is like the generic out of the box checks. And then we also have, you know, all ways to customize. So we can set up custom buckets that do all kinds of custom um, measurements, and we can have like, you know, a column can be null 5% of the time, but
Yeah.
you know, and we can set thresholds, right? And there's of course we have you know, we have the strict you know, we're very strict rules around schema and data type, and then we define key fields so that, you know, it's very easy to configure on a data set by data set basis. What are the dedupe rules? What are the change tracking rules? You know, so it just makes it easier. And then of course there's the web portal, and you can always see the KPIs over time, and you can see, you know, everything's very transparent. So when something goes through a hiccup period or a period of change when things aren't that great, everyone can see that.
Hmm.
Um,
Incredible.
yeah.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on here. We're going to keep it moving. We've got another panel coming up. And as you all know, I am keeping the time. I'm the timekeeper of the day. So we're going to bring on our panelists for this next session.